The 80s was very much defined by politics. Having returned from Paris, where I took up my documentary studies, I felt I was going right into the eye of the storm. That's really how much I recall that period. This, I think, is a decade that would rank maybe second to the other turbulent decade, which was the 1890s, the revolution. Spanish Revolution that led to the Filipino-American War. So we're talking about the turn of the century that defined the history and politics of this nation. 90 years after, this would be now another decade with much turbulence that called for a redefinition of our politics. I don't know how much it really achieved, but just like the Spanish and American episode, did we really achieve much? Until now, it's a highly contested issue. What exactly is the role that revolution plays in shaping our politics and our nation? And why my generation? All right. First of all, I really grew up under the martial law. I was 13 years old when martial law was declared, and I was growing up in the southern island of Iloilo. But still, you would feel the pangs of the repressive regime. And then, when I went to the university, I came here to UP. And this is the seedbed of all of these activities. And much as I went to theater, film was, of course, a passion of mine until I studied in Paris. And when I returned, I started making my own films. But all around me, film was getting politicized. But that is, and I think we need to decouple things, as I'm really, and I stand for alternative cinema, meaning documentary, short film, everything non-industrial and non-commercial. So that was part of the expression of the politics of the times. And I'm glad that you're touching on this because it seemed as if, always there's this talk only of the commercial movie industry, how it became politicized. But again, there was just really this kind of a bifurcation maybe that happened in the works of Lino Brocka, Mike De Leon, Bernal, but business as usual for the movie industry in itself. So I can see that the interest that you may have now will be, the whole notion of the relationship between politics and cinema. And true enough, it was a theme that really defined that decade. And so Signals was a very important film that I have some personal knowledge of because I was not just a filmmaker, I am also into organization. So right after the revolution, I staged a major independent film and video festival. Now, this was major because I was able to pull together films that were banned during the Marcos era. A film that almost like for 20 years could not be found, like Sacada, about the sugar workers in Negros. That was a major film that was banned by Marcos during the era. Suddenly it resurfaced. And while I was showing it in a jam-packed audience, I sold and oversold the ticket. It was a jam-packed SM. And this is not just one of those little ghettoized spaces in a classroom or what. No, I went right into the malls. I had the audacity to really do that because, that's just part of the political action that we needed to make. I was crying. I was crying because I remember exactly when it was shown in the South where I was inside the movie house and then suddenly everything turned dark. And then I said what was happening. I went out and peeked through the curtain and I could see military persons bringing some cans. I was too young maybe, but the film was not shown again. So we were all just shooed away that, some technical problem. But there was something that was indelibly in my mind.
You were in the theater when it
I
happened.
was inside the theater and I peeked through the curtain and I saw people going out in uniform and the civilian and they had cans. And I don't know why that image keep on sticking in my mind. And then I connect that 20 years after that. So I was just in tears because I said, oh my God, here it is again. It was banned by the, of course, censors board during the time. So Signals was part of the entire program that I curated. And Mike De Leon, it's really, hands down, really, his politics. He was living his politics. I had problems with Lino Brocka and his politics. The kind of, I can appreciate, the courage that he took, but the contradictions, now that the dust seems to be settling, I'm beginning to just figure out that the compromises and contradictions that he faced, which I may admire, but in terms of political action, you raise serious questions. Let's go back to Signals. Signals was a Super 8 film. It was shown as a documentary. So these are my indicators. These are real people appearing in the film. This was the real death of Benigno Ninoy Aquino. The same event that triggered many of us here, like me, nothing could stop me anymore way back in 83 to make the films I wanted to make. It was, really gambling with our own destiny already that, no, I'm not going to hold back anymore. I mean, you hear on the radio that Ninoy Aquino was shot. I was with my father in a hospital, and then I hear that on the radio, and I said, what is happening? And this would lead. So since then, you have the scent of a revolution that's just about to happen. I mean, it's just an intuitive thing. And as I said, I just came back from Paris. I was trying to do my film, and it was very
Were you
hard.
working on your film Oliver, or
No, I was working on a film about child prostitution. It's called Children of the Regime. And I couldn't make it. This is the longest, it is the film that took the longest time to finish, 5 years. Because since I returned in 81, end of 81, I couldn't make my film because, first of all, I knew of that story when I was in Paris. The film Le Trottoir de Manille about child prostitution in the Philippines just exploded all over in Europe. And then I said to the embassy people there that when they were asking, is it true that there are child prostitutes in the Philippines? I said, I just arrived barely a few weeks and then, look, I just gave her the Philippines. I don't know about it. We were all shut out on that story because, of course, Marcos controlled the media. I had to be in Europe to know what was going on inside my own country. So when I returned, that was the film that was burning inside me that, is it true, what was going on? And I was playing the generational politics. I was young then, Daniel. I was young, and as a youth and all that, you're just fired up by all these issues. What is going on with my own generation? I couldn't make the film. I couldn't finish it because many times I would be invited in the precinct as well. Why are you shooting, especially in that area, in the prostitution area? It was a ghetto, the Ermita area, all right? That's where the prostitution really happened. It was not scattered all over the metropolis.
red light zone?
The red light zone. So we had our own Pigal, all right? And that it was just there. And it's very well guarded by policemen. And I was working with Super 8 camera. Super 8 is, of course, the antecedent of the video right now. So I go to bars when it was not fashionable to have hidden cameras. I would wrap it with my jacket and you can enter all of these where sex orgies were happening inside bars. So all of these things were happening and my eyes just was lifted. My eyes, something was just lifted. You now begin to see, and I became more sensitive to what was happening there. But because I couldn't really finish my film on child prostitution, then I made a film on Oliver. So here's where I connect signals. My politics was very much invested on the medium, the amateur medium that people called. Super 8 was, that's non-film, But no, I think my generation, and personally myself in my own practice of cinema, I politicized. If I have one contribution, we politicized an amateur medium, medium that was just used for birth, burial, and wedding. But here we are, we're using to create political statements. Then, somebody as stellar as Mike De Leon, I found out was working on a Super 8. How else is he going to make his anti-Marcos film it's this solidarity that I felt. So what was it that he covered? Mainly the burial, the millions of people that went into the funeral of Aquino, but it also had interviews, very strong interviews with people who have been politicized in the country. Then I showed it in this post-1986, post-EDSA Revolution Film Festival. I called it the Independent Film and Video Festival. Of course, the sentiment of the people, were very, very high. The anti-Marcos movement was very much there. So, many of these festivals the films I showed at the festival were very well patronized, and we kept the fire burning at the time. It was a political act, it was a political move. It's not just in films that we can express our politics, but also in terms of film screening where we are face to face with our audience, with our publics, all right? So that was where I also showed my Oliver film. The gay audience was, was the longest, it was almost like a lead was taken off from this marginalized gender group, and suddenly Oliver was such a big hit. So you include politics and gender and women and indigenous people and marginalized cinema, put them all in this festival. It was like a cauldron that's just popping up with all of these fantastic issues.
Was there any connection at all between the festival that was done in '84? I think Makaisa won, that I think Nicanor Changson organized.
1984, you are talking of the experimental cinema of the Philippines. run by the daughter of the dictator, and this is Amy Marcos. It is called the Experimental Cinema of the Philippines. Are we talking about
I
that?
think it's actually called Makaisa 1, and then they published a book called The Politics of Culture. It was most,
Oh.
but I think the ECP
Oh, okay,
actually
sorry.
illicitly contributed and helped staff this conference.
The contradictions we have to live by, because I think it was held in at the CCP. Like many of the things that I did before, I really kept my distance, except that in 1983 is that, we made this film, Oliver, and I have an issue really with experimental cinema. Let me backtrack a little bit. Here in UP, this is where I really held my court, so to speak. I was running the workshop since after I returned from Paris. The first thing I did was, for me, education is gonna be key to whatever thing I'm gonna do in this country. Education and cinema, this is really these are the two things that I really want to work on. So I'm doing my films, but I'm doing pedagogical action as well. So I was running workshops and I was asking for a revolution in our film production. We are living in this very strange time. So how do we, I called ourselves young filmmakers. We were young then, all right? How did we see ourselves in the unfolding of history, all right? And so we were like a pocket of artists doing our own thing here, and then I put up the Manila Short Film Festival. That was in 80, I think in 80, 81 or something. But anyway, no, even earlier, 81. Then the next year, Amy Marcos put up her Experimental Cinema of the Philippines. And then 84, well, she held this for 2 or 3 years. And then this Makaisa, I think was done in the CCP, but I kept my distance from any of this. My point here is that I only joined that Amy Marcos initiated Experimental Film Festival because she was giving out 10,000 pesos. And I believe that that's our money. My eyes were on that money. I want to win that first prize because I'm going to make my next film. So take the money and run. That was my only philosophy. I didn't expect really that I would top with first prize with Oliver. We would win the grand prize. But true enough, we took the money and then made our next film for that. So as I said, those are the contradictions that we have to live by. I brought Oliver with me. We went up the stage all in drag and all that. I mean, those were the times, Daniel. I mean, oh my God, those were the times.
And I think maybe was Joshua Charisma's film Sabangan shown?
It won in experimental cinema as well. It won there. I mean, many of our films, there was only that platform because, sure enough, I still carried on with my Manila Short Film Festival here, but a festival that really had no money against the daughter of the dictator who had all the money, and resources in her hands. She had this Manila Film Center where films were shown. I mean, in the end, she just diminished all our efforts and decimated us. I mean, this is when the state comes into the picture and then takes over the cultural production in this country. And of course, the more that I was seething, because look, the baby festival that I was organizing here, just killed because how can we fight the state at the time? So it was very difficult. It was not until the end of after the revolution that I came back with much effort now to put together everything that I thought was censored or not allowed to be shown during the dictatorship.
So at the time, it was more or less an underground. They call it, I guess Mike De Leon calls it the Betamax circuit.
It was the Betamax circuit. That's absolutely true.
But you get some interesting crossings over between the mainstream or like the big budget films that Broca and De Leon are doing, and then the independent films that you are doing, and then Signos is kind of, I guess, a fairly unique phenomena. And then you have civil society movements like Free the Artist and Concerned Artists of the Philippines. My understanding is that Mike De Leon and Broca are the two main movers, but there's also a little bit of friction between them historically. Were you kind of watching as that played out? And do you have any memories of?
No, first of all, I really took a very strong stand against against the industry. I was really a very ideological stand. I was anti-industry, and therefore, what was going on there, except for very few occasions when I joined Free the Artist movement, the anti-censorship marches that Broca was called, then I would attend there, and it's very good that remember I was across the street here in Tibog. And then I saw Broca and he saw me. And then, there was a very nice gesture that he did. He crossed the street and then said, "Hello, Nick, and thank you for joining." And that was all that he said. And of course, I was keeping my distance because they're industry people. First of all, you're starstruck. These are big people and all that. And we were always looked upon as amateurs. And I turned that into a political thing, really, that we're amateurs, all right? So we are of a different breed, but we share the same political aspirations. So there were those intersections indeed that happened. So with Broca, it was really more of very physical. So I saw him, how he would turn into a raging creature, screaming, throwing stones at a former censor's chief. That was his arch enemy. Maybe you know him. I don't have to name him, but it was this anti-censorship thing. And so we were right outside of the residence of the censor's chief along Morato. So maybe you know already that's the kid, right? So he was throwing stones, screaming. So we were there also lifting our hands and screaming. That's my memory of this intersection. But the wonderful intersection, the more politically effective intersection, I thought was, I loved writing manifestos before I was young. All right, I would write manifestos, statements, petitions, and all that. And in one of my petitions, who would sign it? Mike De Leon. I have his signature, together with Kidlat Tahimik, Pitla Kaba. That was quite an accomplishment for me. One was a petition for the recognition of short film as a potent cinematic medium. That's what, mainly because of the films of Joe Quaresma, Asia Vision, name it, I even went to a point wherein I was questioning exactly where was the movie industry during this time of dictatorship and where was alternative cinema? What were we doing? You've got Joey Clemente, with a bullet inside his bowels, and his camera toppling down and all that. We were risking our lives. How many times was I also invited to the precincts, to the police station? And because we're not big names, we don't land up on, as if we wanted this. No, we did land up on the front pages. One Lino Broca interrogation, and of course, it's all over in the newspaper. But we were the unseen, unsung, but we were keeping the fire burning, and we knew our politics. We're standing firm on what's alternative cinema. And I thought the revolution would have been an occasion to catapult us into, recognized short film, because I feel short film and documentaries would be the real cinema that this country strongly needs, because it speaks the truth. And the movie industry, it's highly compromised.
It seems like with Lido Changson, there was at least a modicum of an attempt for Broca to, provide some level of support for independent short films. How far did that go?
Now you're bringing.
Because I know.
Now you something I really didn't really want to talk about, but there was an incident that happened at the CCP where this distancing between Broca and I, really started to happen, and somehow Broca just started to become demystified. Bless his soul, of course. But the thing is, I made a film. This is now 1987. Some people call this as my major achievement. All right, these revolutions happened like refrains in a song. Nobody else, I think, chronicled except the ones from Asia Vision, and they did it on video. Mine was film. I was the only one. I would like to claim that I was the only one who was really right at the eye of the storm of the revolution during those 4 days, capturing it in celluloid. Super 8. Sure, it's amateur, but hell, I was looking around. Who else is making a film here? Where are the brave and courageous filmmakers that we have, the producers that we have? Where are they documenting it? Where were they, when the rebels and the loyalists were battling up, and I could hear bullets flying over my head? PTV4, we're talking about that. And I have captured it really. I'm just maybe 3 yards away from the soldiers running here and there, and we were being gunned by some snipers and all of that. But my film will talk. You don't have to believe me. Let my film speak, right? But my point here is that I've got this film that went all the way back to the time when I was a fetus inside my mother's womb. I was talking about my personal history, and here's where my audacity came in, against the backdrop of a raging revolution. Can you imagine? And it was my coming out party. I was coming out as a homosexual in my film. And here it is. And I thought I was dedicating this to Lino Broca. All right? And here's what happened. Broca was in the jury. Was in the jury, all right? And the next thing I know is that the announcement was there was no first prize winner. There was a first prize winner, all right? And that was a film by Lito Chongson, or at least Asia Cinevision. And who was in the executive board of that? Broca. There you go.
Mhm.
And there was no second prize winner. There was no third prize winner, and there was an honorable mention. It was Nick Deocampo, whose film, I had two entries, it was about artists in Paris, which has nothing to do at all with the revolution here. It was about these immigrant artists that we have who made it big as modernist painters in Paris. So that was the honorable mention. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. What happened? I want an explanation. My film, it's the only one in the entire program that was about the revolution. You have here a first-hand, close to 30 minutes of coverage of the revolution, intertwined my own personal history, maybe convoluted into my homosexual perspective and all that. But hey, I was emancipating myself. And this was not recognized. That's all. I don't care about the money or the award and everything, but please, a recognition. And a big disappointment because Broca was in the jury, and only for me to find out. And I knew exactly that he was in the board of that film that just won.
Right. Potential conflict of interest.
Oh, wow, what is going on? And so I was raging and frothing and everything. And then, I had I'm a researcher. So somehow I get to know something and then said, Broca was maybe pissed about my film. And one, he had issues about my voice. I mean, he said, the voice, what the hell is wrong with my voice? What was his issue about my voice? Because it was the first person. Nobody makes autobiographical films in this country. Maybe Kidlat Tahimik does, but I don't know what kind of, it's but in that film, it is on a first-person point of view. This is my perspective.
So maybe he was shocked by the newness of the experiment.
Absolutely, maybe. I don't know what really happened, but this was the intersection we had, and sadly, that's the last strong memory I keep of Broca. It hurt me a lot. I mean, because people of my generation just idolized him. This is what I said. And in the end, I'm curious about the contradictions of his personality. He's a very complex personality.
It's interesting that what happened to cinema later on in the 80s, and I understand from the work that I've done that Lito Chongson was actually interested in doing more experiments, like using the Tatasuela, but Asia Visions became more of a movement, sort of straight docu project, and my understanding was that was one reason why he actually left, because he wanted to do more experimentation with documentary. So was there kind of a splitting off of the procedural approach towards documentation and the creative documentary experimentation?
I call it a movement, but it hardly cohered. In fact, I was the more fun, mainly because I was so seduced and fascinated by the word movie workers. I know my Eisenstein, I know my Soviet film history, and movie workers was so fascinating for me. I thought we could change the industry, and for me, what was important is we can change this through education. So I headed the Film Institute, and again, that's where I held court in terms of my own agenda of creating the alternative cinema. UP appeared to be so small for me. I was least understood here as well, to my big surprise. I mean, let us not go into all, but my budget was becoming smaller and smaller. We were also scared that maybe the military would interfere with the workshops I was doing. And in the end, that's it. That was over. But then some of my students were already with Mole Fund. I said, why don't you join us here? And so I did. And then before you know it, this movement for independent alternative cinema started to flourish in ways much better and bigger than what we could possibly do inside a university, because that was a private foundation. And I strongly suspect until around 25 years after, when they realized, what the hell exactly was I doing inside that institute? What is alternative cinema? What's independent cinema? They thought that I'm going to create the movie industry, or improve the movie industry. But really, to answer your question, it's not just the documentary movement that was fragmented. The whole cultural agenda was really unenlightened, uninformed of the changes that was happening. Why? Because the government policy under Cory Aquino was culture was not a priority of our government. One, we understood her. The first thing was to reinstall the democratic institutions. We agree. And so we in the culture, we who contributed to the social change using cultural means, well, we were sidelined once again. So each to his own or her own. So I took care of my space. Lito Chongson took care of his own space. Were there intertwinings or intersections? Hardly, except for the festivals that I tried to create. I showed almost all of the Asia Visions films in my film festivals. That's why they had some platform there. But I know that they were traveling from province to province, and so did I. So we were all, there's a word for it. We were all just, not just fragmented, but anyway, we were doing our own thing there. When it comes to the documentary, there are so many things going on. Political filmmaking, I could understand if it started to wane and change in the Asia Visions. It's all about funding as well. I could understand that. In my case, we were also dependent on the embassies and the foreign cultural houses, Goethe Institute, Japan Foundation, French Embassy, and all that. And on top of it, of course, I had to really provide all of that. The political economy of the whole thing was that, one, you have your back leaning on this foreign support, but at the same time, in my case, my initiative was to put up a lot of workshops, charge fees, do a lot of film screenings, charge fees, and do some commissioned work, and hopefully we can have also some fees there. And so from out of this, then there's money that we could do to finance our next workshop. And it's always a reinvention every year that we had to do. For 25 years, sorry to say, but the sacrifice I did, I was the first one to go into all of these international festivals. I know all these producers. I know all these grants. I just sat on them because there's just work to be done. Maybe I was stupid to do that. In short, sacrificed my own career. In other words, I just became a weekend filmmaker. Saturday and Sunday, okay, no office. Although sometimes that's when I hold my workshops. And then that's when I make my films. Or whenever I can make my films, all right? So the sad thing about it is that the economy and this bifurcation of the documentary movement, it was a missed opportunity for many of us.
Can you talk about the role that EROP played in founding Mole Fund and to what extent that provided support for at least what your initial goal was?
It's a long story. For Joseph Estrada, I know will be remembered for the impeachment. Joseph Estrada will be remembered for the corruption. Isn't it that he's top 10 among the most corrupt government officials of all time? But I know Estrada from another end, all right? When he was still a humble mayor, all right? And he was really a pillar of the movie industry. An industry that is not really an industry according to government estimation. It is only a milking cow for millions and millions that go to God knows where. Nobody's accounting for all the money that they get as taxes from the movie industry when, in truth, the government should be supporting that industry. But anyway, for a long time, this government kept on milking millions from the movie industry when this government does not want to recognize movie workers as real professional workers worthy of the benefits of the state. Why? Because they're contractual, and therefore they have no medical benefits, no burial, no death benefits, no benefits of anything at all, no educational benefits. They were exploited, an exploited class in the society, and by an industry. And that's why these are the things that fascinated me. EROP, sure, he went to Ateneo, but did not finish because he fought for his classmate that was bullied by an American.
Right.
You know that story?
Yeah, I've heard it.
And he was kicked out because he punched an American who, as the case came out, bullied his own friend. And so he never finished school. And so when I was invited to teach there during the board meeting, because he looked up to people from UP, and I was from UP, and he would make me sit to his right. You hardly sit on the right side of his guy. And during his drunken moments, all right, he would look to me and, it's good that you have studied, huh? You're UP. Oh, very good. And you're cum laude. Very good. But, me, I did not study. But why I want you to head my school here is that education. You must give them education. I did not study filmmaking. So I only had one marching order: educate them. So that gave me that moral strength to take care of that, because otherwise I was inside a lion's den. This is the movie industry.
I want to go back in a little bit and talk more about maybe Arab is a pivot from having attended your earlier lecture on the relationship between independent cinema and the industry itself. Very interesting. I had a question about that, but I guess first of all, why would an industry, aside from wanting education, right? Why would an industry fixture like Arab invest in someone as experimental as you in terms of your approach and your goals?
He didn't know. He didn't know what I stood for. He didn't know what I stood for. But the whole thing is this: 1974 was crucial. Martial law was set up in 72. This very much affected the running of the movie industry. Because of the military rule, the whole bomba phenomenon, these films, the softcore movement, was erased from the face of the earth during that time. All right. And the movie industry was in search of leadership and supervision. Here comes Imelda Marcos coming in as the governor of Metro Manila, and took under her wing, the charge of running a cultural event that commanded millions. All right. And that's the film festival. It was called only the Manila Film Festival, that she turned. No, it was really just the Manila Film Festival. Here comes Arab, who was then the mayor of San Juan, but at the same time, coincidentally, the president of the producers, the Philippine Motion Pictures Producers and Distributors Association. That's very crucial, because he's the one now in charge of running the affairs of the movie industry. She approached Madame Marcos with a resolution saying, change this Manila Film Festival, which was Manila-based. It's the old city of Manila, only made in one city, and turn it now into the metropolis-wide event. And Imelda Marcos saw the merits of that, and she signed it. But there was a clause in it that says the funds will now support the activities of the Movie Workers Welfare Foundation, a pseudo. When I say pseudo, it's not private. It is private, but getting money from the government, mainly because Joseph Estrada, from what he has experienced, is that movie workers die on the set, accident or old age or whatever. They are not educated. What do they know about lighting? They don't have education. Movie workers get married, have children, and at that time, around 400,000 people were dependent on the movie industry. Close to 500,000 people.
That's big.
It is big. Yeah. Nobody takes care of the education. And we're not talking about education for film education. Education as in grade school, they cannot even send their children to school. This is his sector. Now we have a party list, right? Before there was none of this. So he was taking care of this group. So there it is. So suddenly, Movie Workers Welfare Foundation became a beneficiary. All right? And for a long time, that was it. It was able to shore up a lot of money. It made the mistake, however, of sending, this is where I come in later on, of sending Filipinos who are children of people working in the industry to study in UCLA or USC. American education. Imagine.
But it's expensive.
Expensive, paid for by Mobile Fund. And not only that, they didn't return. So Arab felt bitter and bad about this whole thing. But he must continue the Film Institute. So there was an earlier director there, let me not mention his name, but here and there they were doing this work. I was more interested with commercials, advertising. Then, by accident, I was thrown into this situation, and I have a clear agenda of what to do. And so he left to me, he just said, educate these people, do your workshops. I'm supportive, all right? So, but the thing is, later on, there are politics within this, this thing. They were lowering and lowering and lowering my budget, because I'm good at fund solicitation. I can knock on the doors of embassies, convince them with my big mouth and big ideas, and suddenly I got support from the Goethe Institute, the Japan Foundation, the French Embassy, and the feeling of the board was, hey, you can do it by yourself. You don't need this money.
You were
find your money
too
somewhere
successful.
else. So, I didn't even know, I didn't even imagine how much money I would be receiving and all that. I didn't have a car. I was walking down the street. I had death threats, phone calls because of the documentaries I made on child prostitution. So finally, I got to finish it. And I would walk my way through dark alleys, almost a kilometer, until I get to Kamuning. And there are phone calls saying, your time is up, your hours are numbered, somebody is watching you, we know where you live. What the fuck?
people in the sex industry.
No. Oh no! These are the owners of the gay bars or the bars that I went to these bars and made films, and suddenly the film was finished. I'm showing it everywhere, and people get to know. Oh my God! At this particular bar, I mean, suddenly it's an expose. The television at that time were not doing those things, all right? So I had my own. But anyway, back to. Sorry, you edit this. You said anecdotes. I've got a lot of anecdotes, man. I got a lot.
This is very interesting. But I'm still curious. What kind of base? It sounds like it was a little bit fraught at Mole Fund, but what kind of base did it provide you for the experimental pedagogy that you wanted to?
Where would he come? It's me, it's him, makes me recall that, Nick, how could you forget? I was in your workshops. I was seated right in front of your workshop, your first workshop in UP. Oh my God, please make me remember, because I've got thousands of students. You've got Raymond Red. The whole independent movement started where? In that place. In the end, Mole Fund couldn't do anything but recognize exactly and create a space for awards for short films, for documentaries. It came and went and all that, but somehow was banging on the door of their consciousness, of their practice, that there are, films outside of your commercial movie industry. So it was a political, ideological stand that I was able to somehow achieve until, of course, a new, era was no longer there. I'm now talking about the 2000s, all right? He was already impeached. New people run the board. And then suddenly they found out, oh, aren't you, that's really in line with the movie industry line of thinking? Oh, so finally you've caught me and all that. And so, well, they didn't renew my contract and off I left.
Do you think that has to do with anything to do with you're getting further and further away from the 80s? There's a kind of a closing down of what had been a more open terrain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Arap's an interesting figure. He
a study should be made on Arap. I mean, he epitomizes what is just like Broca. You have two very interesting personalities. I must say now, it dawns on me. I mean, the two faces of the industry. The Broca, the two-faced, the Janus-faced Broca Estrada. You might just be right there. You're making me think. You might just be right there in making them.
Yeah.
Okay ba tayo, bro? Okay ba? Okay lang.
Huwag na lang po.
Wag nang, okay. Wag mo na akong magpamay. Mainit lang, bro. Pag nagsalita, okay. Sige, salamat. At wag, okay. Ano pa, bro?
Okay lang.
Pawisan ba ako?
Opo. Sa all.
Tanggal. I'm sweating this
Just
out.
let us know if you need any water or anything. Or you got.
I have my water.
Okay, good.
Hair ko, bro. Kasi minsan nagkaganyan ng hair ko. Sabihin mo, okay lang? Okay na nga yan?
Pahawit na lang.
Ahawit. I need to look beautiful too,
Kasi bumaba po siya.
Oo nga passionate Alright, ready and go.
Broca is fascinating. Arap's fascinating. And in 1998, looked up this quote. He said, "My idol is Ronald Reagan. He was really underestimated when he ran for president because he was a mere actor. But he proved all those intellectual snobs wrong." And this is what Richard Nixon was actually doing before Ronald Reagan. Do you have any insights into what that might mean for Arap, not as a politician, but as a movie actor?
Arap brought respectability, of course, that long and hard to earn, because the sub-narrative of the movie industry workers in this country vis-a-vis politics is that they're always looked down upon as mere entertainers and all those. Maybe you must have heard stories about them. Rogelio de la Rosa was among the first one who wanted to vie for presidency, but he was talked out of it by the political party, I think the Liberal Party. And then later on he was turned into an ambassador. The movie industry or people working there were never seen as really as, people who can be trusted, and they engage in all these private lives that are questionable and all that. But Arap's popularity was really based on the persona that he created, that earned him the millions of votes that he had, that he was fighting for justice, he was fighting for the small people, etc., etc. This is his screen persona. On the other hand, I've seen the personal persona outside of that mask. In those board meetings that were held, I saw his weaknesses as well. I'm going to be personal about this, but as a homosexual, I was fighting also for my own recognition and all that, and suddenly here was Estrada, who made me sit right beside him, and he is the epitome of a macho guy. You know that, right? I mean, he's the guy who, wow, who engages in a street brawl and all that, and I saw his contradiction and a sense of acceptance when he said, for example, there was a big party, and again I was to his side, and then he said, I declare something, you know how much I hate gays. Of course, I didn't like that. But he said, so he was against Broca, Morato, and all of this. They perceived to be gays. And I said, but there's one gay that I love, that I love. All right. And he turned to me and then said, this is him at my side. And he kissed me. I'm sorry, this is my own contradiction as well, but the acceptance. I mean, I'm occupying the top position in a teaching institution, no other schools, not because I'm gay or whatever. So many homosexuals are sitting in as principals and heads of whatever. But here is an institution wherein I had, for 25 years, I could run it. It was not an issue whether I was gay or what. Anyway, the movie industry is all gay. But suddenly, I didn't expect it from this macho guy who would entrust me to run his school. And so, indeed, he was such a contradictory person that goes all the way to his policies, but he didn't really do a micromanagement of Mobile Fund. And that's why I could get away with a few things, with my own experimental activities, with my own documentaries, and all of these things. And as I said, it took them quite a long time before they find out that it's not really in line with the commercial line of development.
But that was after Arap had already left.
Yes, that was already after Arap was left.
Yeah, it's interesting that he, in a way, was responsible for kickstarting the independent movement, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
by funding your
Oh, the independent movement has a much longer history. But in that case, I would like to actually make a claim, for good or bad, that the golden age of independent cinema happened during that period. I'm sorry, it was my period. I was among the architects of that. But if nobody is going to talk about it, I will. I have all the reasons to say why it was golden. I mean, many people would claim golden here, golden there, and all that, but I mean, the plurality of films that were made. Among the documentary itself, God, the explosion that was happening. Then you add the experimental cinema, which flourished in the 80s. All right? The short films that just exploded in the 80s. The filmic tongues that were spoken. Suddenly, film spoke in so many tongues in the 80s. 80s was crucial. 80s was a turning point for alternative independent cinema because it also became politicized. Never has there been a moment in the history of cinema in this country where film was politically engaged and engaged in such a way that nobody is just acting out the politics. They were the real people. This is the authentic voice and the real images of people, indigenous people in the Buntok, Joseph Ortiz, tribes against the state, women talking about health issues, abortion, and everything. All of these are there. So an archive is necessary to put together the films of the 80s, and that's exactly the job that is ahead of me. That's what I want to do.
It's your upcoming project.
Oh, so many projects.
What what are is there some sort of crisis in the industry that because I'm thinking about Arap and your lecture on the opening that presents itself to people like FPJ and Arap in the 60s, right? Is there some equivalency with that in the 80s? And then what about the 60s and people like Arap coming on the scene?
Arap came from the 60s and the movies that he appeared in. He starred in as a rebel, Heron Busapos, Heron the Scavenger, Batang Quiapo, Quiapo Boy, and all of this. He was the James Dean. He was the rebel. That was the persona he created. He was anti-establishment. He internalized it. He lived as if he's the rebel of the industry without really thinking in the end that, he would be catapulted into the leadership, that he would become head of this. And then when he was, I think Mobile Fund it's a missed opportunity. Mobile Fund could have been really his monumental contribution. I mean, he thought of social welfare when the government and the state did not even have any thought about social welfare for the movie workers. He thought of this. He thought, oh, so many other things. All right, I don't want to be accused of, oh, because you worked with Arab and all. It's just that I've seen, the man behind the movie mask. All right. So what was that opportunity? The 80s. The 80s, as I said, was triggered mainly. The main motivation was political, a change of regime. Now, this put Arab into a kind of an identity crisis. All right. Identity crisis in such a way that he was identified with the Marcos regime. Now he has to sing a different song after that. But he has established many things that he did already. But you could see exactly how people looked up to him after the revolution. He was the only one who survived the avalanche, the purge, yeah, and landed here. Nobody survived the purge under Duterte. No opposition made it. During that time, only Arabs survived the landslide avalanche because people were solid behind him. And then you could see exactly that, then he wagered to become a senator. He got it again. And then he became vice president. And then later on, the presidency. But politics, I don't want to go into all of these things. It's just that maybe ill-advised, political, all of these things. Politics can really be dirty. But in the end, what was happening? So the political opportunity opened for a movie man to now walk the walk and talk the talk. A senator, well, the only bill he did was about the Carabao welfare bill. Number two, but he did something very big, the anti-US bases.
Right.
He rallied that. And the film was instrumental, Kuko ng Agila, right? So that was we'll get into that, but that was instrumental. He was lightweight in the Senate, but legislative work was never his thing. And so he was elected to the vice presidency. You saw him work again, the anti-drugs and everything. And then my point here is that his closeness to the industry started to wane. So the opening did two things for him. He became more politically engaged, and then he left us on our own, including the financial problems that the company faced, because Cory took away the management and the funds from Mobile Fund. So we were hitting the dust like crazy. My problem at that time was, how the hell am I going to run this thing? This is not my company.
So you really could have come in and replaced the ECP as the kind of premier.
Oh, it could have. It could have, but it did not happen because Cory punished Mobile Fund. Because it was an Arab Estrada creation, and Estrada was identified with Cory.
She gutted the ECP had sort of been transitioned already. It's kind of complex.
Yeah, and it was decimated, taken out of the picture.
And the archive was neglected.
Absolutely, everything suffered after that.
But I didn't realize that Mole Fund was also a casualty.
Oh, it was a casualty. So the funds it was receiving were now appropriated for the Film Academy of the Philippines. All right, an industry organization which failed to become unionized.
Right.
All right, so it did not attend really to the real problems of the small people because it was not unionized. It was just for awarding and red carpets and everything else.
It seemed Lino Broca tried to organize an industrial union in '87, but that was a flop.
It was.
I guess my understanding was when Sanchez was out of the Department of Labor that may have killed any chance.
Yeah, but I don't know really how much Broca would have wanted to go there. It takes a lot of sacrifice when you want to go into social change or real social work. And Broca was not. That's one of the contradictions with Broca. He makes all of these big pronouncements and does not really go into the nitty-gritty of it. First of all, he is a filmmaker and we applaud him for that. But the point is, he sees the problems of the industry, but I'm beginning to feel all this knowledge get to feed his art rather than really feed the people who really work, who really needs the help. Now, Estrada is, on the other hand, he sacrificed his movie career and then really went into the real work, social work.
It's like, I guess, the art commercialism contradiction that you talk about.
Again, we are haunted by that. It's a spectral phenomenon that haunts us, really.
Because you could say that Arap made this successful, even if his art suffered, he made a successful transition from an outsider in the 60s to being
You're so right.
the industry leader.
Yes.
By the 80s, maybe even by the late 70s, I'm not sure when he sort of takes over. Broca, on the other hand, he tries to establish like cinema artists, and his production, his industrial initiatives, his production initiatives kind of disintegrate in the 70s.
He was sued.
With Manila sa mga kukunang liwanag.
No.
Because there was a lawsuit with that one.
There was a lawsuit, not with that. It was a lawsuit for tinimbang ka ngunit kulang.
I didn't know.
You were weighed but found one thing.
And that destroyed the cinema.
That destroyed it. And you need to research on this because because it's not a good news, good topic. Very few would know about it. But this is the reason why he had to make compromises with the movie industry, because he had to do commercial films in order to pay off the debts that he had.
A stopgap thing that he had to do.
Made him bitter. Yeah.
But in a way, Arab changed the industry in ways that I guess Broca wasn't able to, and that's neither here nor there. Maybe it's comparing apples and oranges. But I guess I'm wondering what happens to this industry. It doesn't recover. It seems to me like the industry doesn't recover in the 80s in the way that maybe it recovered in the 60s with FPJ and Arab. And maybe I'm wrong.
So many things happened in the 80s, including technological change, including change of policy. And policy is very important. If your head does not support your industry, you're as good as dead. Marcos supported it with all the contradictions. Look, it flourished, including the opposition, including Broca. I mean, come on. I mean, by his very contradiction over a state-sponsored industry, of course, he was known also, and he created a career out of it. I mean, so to a certain point, the very context and the material condition that supported that generation of the 70s, 80s, that's why some call it the second golden age. I won't call it as such, but indeed, there was a new cinema that emerged. It was a high point. And then only for it to become decimated, to untangle itself by the late 80s, especially going to the 90s, two things happened that did the industry in. One, of course, the policy of the state was anti-culture. Then number two, technology came in. Video started to challenge the celluloid. It started with the Betamax. It went into the Umatic, the VHS. Then the digital started coming in. From analog to digital, all this happened in the 80s. Then when the 2000 came in, it's over for the industry as a celluloid medium.
And I guess there's still a global economic recession.
Oh, add that, absolutely, add that. The global, yes, you're right.
Which Arab is, I guess, Arab and FPJ benefit from the post-war boom, as you were discussing in your lecture.
Yeah.
So like the weird Bayan Ko Kapit sa Patalim is a weird film. It's fun, like Tony Gonzalez becomes the tourism minister. His the Mondragon office is where Corey's campaign happens. Do you have any interesting anecdotes or observations about?
Nothing more than what you've got. It's just that this good-looking tourism secretary who was filthy rich supported Cory Aquino during her candidacy and stuck with her all the way to the troubled times of the revolution. And of course, she was awarded with this. Part of the support that Tony Gonzalez, right, gave to Cory was the production of this anti-Marcos film, which in itself, combined pieces of documentary. And that's, for me, that was a plus point for me, because anybody who gives a nod to documentary, wow, it's good, all right? And Lino Broca had actual marches, anti-Marcos marches, stitched, woven into his film, where Philip Salvador sort of weaves in and out. I thought he just used it as a background. I mean, but within the narrative of the film, I could understand. This encoding and representation was significant, a breakthrough within the movie industry, because who else would like to do that during that time? And therefore, the reason why the more incensed was the board of censors, with the release of the film, because it contained this anti-Marcos marches.
Was it really intended as some sort of, right, the funder being Tony Gonzalez, it has some sort of propaganda value, presumably?
It had. I mean, that film was propaganda, an anti-Marcos propaganda, without necessarily becoming a pro-Cory propaganda. So it can work this way, because nowhere was Cory Aquino shown there. But were the things espoused by Cory Aquino Maybe yes, maybe no. It had its own narrative to drive its own story, but definitely it was an anti-Marcos propaganda. That one was very clear. And that was good enough. That was good enough because people could identify with it, but it was punished by the regime. The film was smuggled out of the country, as you very well know, shown in Cannes, where Lino Broca had this image of the Philippines stitched on his Barong Tagalog, his national costume, with blood spilling over the image of the country. And I think it says Bayan ko and all that. So he used the International Film Festival as a platform for his dissent and used this film to rant and talk about what's going on in the Philippines. And then when he returned, of course, he was brought to court that there are laws that you cannot bring any film out of this country without approval by the state through its instruments like the Board of Censors and all of these things. That's why even us, who are independent filmmakers, go a long way to hiding our films because they didn't really have all these X-ray machines before, right? Hiding our Super 8s and all that, keeping it in whichever way we can, or on the other hand, get it approved by the board, all right? As long as, and sometimes I would change the title of my films like Planting Coconuts in the Philippines. Of course, they had no Super 8 projector, so what are they going to do? Are they going to look at my anti-Marcos documentaries? And I say there, planting coconuts. I mean, it's a joke, it's a risk. However, what if they catch you? But I was convinced exactly because it's more scary if they catch you in the airport. All right? That's prima facie evidence. That's primary evidence that you're doing smuggling. All right? So sometimes when it gets the better of you, this problem gets the better of you, play the game. It might take you a week to get your permit, but, who would question it's planting coconuts in the Philippines? Of course, when I'm boarding the plane, of course, ha, 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 you had won over your government. But the point here now is that when Lino Broca returned after that his stint in Cannes, and it was all over the papers, Variety covered it and all that, of course the government sued him, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the end, of course, the Supreme Court sided with him.
And he was able to show the film.
And he was able to show the film.
But I understand there was a little bit of festival politics with that at Cannes, and Ricient was involved, and Mike De Leon had a film to show, of course, Sister Stella, which didn't end up being showed. I don't know if you have any
Not
comment
so
on
much. No, but there are a lot of stories about Pierre Ricient, but because they're not first-hand information, it's hard to comment. I really don't know what happened. But he was he was the kingmaker, Pierre Ricient. And Lino Broca may have been lucky, and in the end, not so lucky to have Ricient, because Ricient was very controlling. Ricient was the one who really whispered to the Cannes gods, Broca, is the guy. And you know how vocal he is compared to Mike De Leon, who's more modest and does not really talk, doesn't make a big scene out of himself and all that. And therefore, Broca, there's a lot that came out of supporting Broca. But in the end, if you hear other stories, and it's not for me to tell them, to tell you about this, like Nora Honor had problems such as Shen, had her to produce all of these things, really no added support, but Nora had to, make several copies of this and all that. She doesn't know anymore where her copies are, so suddenly it becomes Jerry Shen's property, or God knows whatever happened. So it's a good story to tell again. It's a noise from upstairs.
Are you picking that up at all?
Yeah, but anyway, it's something that you may not want to use anyway because it's hearsay.
Well, let's jump back to Arap then, who makes some interesting political, you could say, films in the 80s as well. The labor film, Bangkang Papel Saragat ng Apoy, which is a film about union organizing.
Yeah, union organizing.
And then the Basis film in 89. What did you think about those films, and were you at all surprised? I've heard they were passion projects. They weren't really money makers for him. He just wanted to do it.
Arap can really be driven. You know where his heart is. It's so unfortunate that, he was tainted with all of this corruption. I sympathize with him because the Arap I know is this person who is really working for the small people. So that Bangkang Papel, whether he was convincing with his acting, I have problems with his acting, okay? But the politics is kind of right. However, that politics is really made really out of the promotions because the films don't, they're not as political as those third world movies that we see from Latin America or Africa or Europe, for example. I mean, the film language, you know what I'm trying to talk about. Formalistically, these films don't really add up to anything really political. These are all melodramas that incidentally happen to have a political theme. And that's good enough for Filipino moviegoers. They get it. As long as their hero is there and fighting for them, they get it. Now, whether the film language is liberating and is an instrument of that political message, that doesn't matter to them anymore. It might even be an insult to them if you try to make this experimental or, in a way that, put documentary in it and make them lose the thread of escapist cinema that they are pro to. So Arab knew how to play his cards. He knew how to play his cards. This is where I'm going to catch them, and this is where I'm going to deliver my kilometric lies, because he does. And nobody complained. I mean, critics would. That's why these films won't really end up as classics. They are very didactic. Oh, they are didactic. But what's wrong with that? Right? It rallied people, the sentiment of the people, especially the Cuco sa Aguila film, because it galvanized people's support for the anti-basis. That was a high mountain to climb. Because basically Filipinos are pro-Americans. Believe me, we are. Many still do believe that we need to be pro-American. And so at that particular time, to rally people against America and kick the bases out of the country, that was not a popular choice. Erap Estrada already lost his clout in the movie industry. He was a senator and a lightweight at that. To make a film, would he pull it off? He did. And the anti-basis bill was approved.
Any more personal observations about your experience at EDSA? You're the only person there making films. I guess this is maybe one of the more important questions. Experientially, what's it like? What are you doing?
I don't know why I had to be at that very momentous period. I'm sorry, I'm going to be emotional about this. It's more than 30 years. I mean, it made me realize who I was. 1 million people? Are you joking? And I was there. Who was I? So if you're going to watch my film, these are the very questions I would ask myself, very ontological, epistemological. Why am I here? And why, of all things, was my job, was my task to document this? Why should I be witness? My grandfather witnessed the Philippine-American War. My father fought during the Japanese period. And there I was. I mean, why this confluence of events? And why this particular age when, one, I would have been empowered with 10 rolls of film, Super 8. You know how long a roll would last? 3 minutes. I was going into a revolution with 10 rolls of film. I was just in a workshop in CCP at Mawulfan. The workshop happened at the time when the revolution was declared. I had to make a declaration to the students that I'm sorry, we're not continuing our workshop because, as you know, bigger things are happening and overtaking our little actions in this life. I don't know if we're going to see each other after this. But we all just have to go up. We're disbanding. Then after that, when everybody has left, I rushed to the refrigerator and took the 10 rolls of film. I don't know how long the revolution would last. But there I was. When am I going to press the trigger? When the soldiers press their trigger? What am I going to cover? And events were happening all over the city. And there was no ride. Suddenly you get to realize the market. I was in EDSA, and then suddenly with all the radios blaring, suddenly you could overhear that the Marcoses are leaving Malacanang. I have to run all the way to Malacanang from EDSA. And when I reached there, so many people were already there. And there I was, caught up with all this flood of people. And then we're banging, and the whole movement, not myself, but the entire thing, where we're just banging over the wall, the gates of Malacanang, and it opened up. And then, of course, we were rushing in, and then suddenly you would hear somebody screaming that Malacanang is rigged with dynamites. It's gonna explode anytime. What the hell? And I'm here. I cannot turn back. I cannot go away. I cannot go under. I cannot fly. Wow! Thank God it didn't happen. But I saw something in one of the most turbulent periods of our history. I mean, it's important, for any piece of writing during the Filipino-American War. You imagine how much we treasure one little anecdote, one little diary that may have been written, eyewitness account at the time maybe when Rizal was shot. You know how precious that is. Here is a moving picture. It's Super 8, the so-called amateur, dispensable medium. But who's keeping the film now? Because no decent archive is here to keep it. Somebody from the Asian Film Archive of Singapore, when they put up their archive, came here to the Philippines and looked for only 2 films. Mike De Leon's Third World, Bayaning Third World, and Nick Deocampo's Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song. I don't know how they came to know about my film, but then when I asked the question, they said, Mr. Deocampo, we know how significant your film is. And if kept by an archive, we cannot imagine the value of this in years to come. It's an eyewitness account. Sure, I tainted it, and maybe some people like Broca may not have liked it because it was seen from a point of view of a self-confessed homosexual. I was confessing because I was liberating and emancipating myself. For whom is this revolution if not for people like us? Women. We've got a woman president. What about me? God, how I grew up in such a cruel society. You're called a homosexual when you don't even know what is the meaning of the word? I grew up as a word, not even as a human being. I was a word before I knew the meaning of the word. I was imprisoned inside the word. My God, in a military environment, that was martial law. I grew up during martial law. I have the right. If this society is not going to emancipate me, that event did. I thought, I was so naive to think I was. Of course, it was a struggle all the way right after that. So the films I made after that were all my disappointments and frustrations of the promise of democracy when this was not delivered. The first thing they did with my film, Oliver, was to censor it while it was being shown on TV.
I didn't know that.
His ass was being covered with dancing black images that again stunned me. I thought we were already in a post-Marcos, post-censorship. I was naive. But each of these experiences made me become more, aware and more politically maybe sophisticated. I mean, not to be naive anymore about all these promises. Then that's when I realized I was becoming old. Because being young, you believe, you have hope and you believe. But one has to be old to think about the real politic of life and of a social change.